right, got it?
Okay. Hi. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Very good to be back.
Yeah. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. We are joined once more by Thomas Peters, who is part of the Socialist Equality Group in New Zealand and is a frequent contributor to the World Socialist website. We're going to be. This is our all New Zealand edition and a follow-up to our New Zealand election coverage that we did last time with Thomas's colleague John Braddock, who unfortunately can't join us, but we're hoping that he gets well soon. So, Mr. Peters, thank you so much for joining us back on 1+1.
Thank you, Youri, for having us again, or having me this time.
Oh well, hey, it's always an honor because as I mentioned to you before, I'm a huge fan of the World Socialist website. I've had your colleague over in Britain, Chris Marsden, on before, and yeah, anytime I get the chance to read the World Socialist website, it always has the best critical analysis, and just just in terms of sheer journalism alone. A lot of the work that you guys do in terms of union corruption, in terms of the real enemy from within, which is the pseudo-left, and doing some superb myth busting on just New Zealand alone. I think the World Socialist website's a great source. So it's always great to have you guys from the World Socialist website on.
Yeah, and thank you for that promotional spiel as well, because we are certainly noticing a increased readership of the site, and also just as part of the general I guess radicalization that's taking place among young people and working people all throughout the world. They are searching for socialist perspectives, to understand the tremendous crisis that's unfolding, which has accelerated so sharply over the past year.
Yeah, I mean, just before I get to the first question, we see the system crumbling all around us, and then, every time we think, and you as a Trotskyist must always think this. Every time we think that, okay, this is finally the moment for real revolutionary change, the propaganda system always manages to find some kind of a way to transform itself into, no, this is going to be the new normal. We're all going to be, yes, there's a global pandemic going on, there's a highly infectious disease going on, but still, profits over people, and if you're going to get sick with coronavirus, tough shit for you. And how does this happen? Well, we're definitely going to get into it, because one of the questions I have is all about propaganda, and of course the pseudo-left always plays the critical role in making sure that this bloody system of capitalism keeps transforming itself.
Sorry to just to interrupt you there, I guess. I mean, it's we're living in a what is really a pre-revolutionary period, and I don't think that this is a small crisis in that sense. It's something that we have compared really to the outbreak of the First World War. I mean, the pandemic is exposing so sharply to billions of people the reality of capitalism. Really, I mean, this is not just obviously not just a natural sort of problem in the sense of a disease. It's there's the reason that 1.5 million people have died has to do with the structure of society, and the response of the ruling class, which we can we can discuss more, but has been entirely to protect the rich at the expense of the vast majority of working people. And this will have an effect, I mean, on working class consciousness that can't just be sort of easily dealt with by the powers that be. I mean, it's it is, as I say, radicalizing people and forcing people to seriously reconsider their political views. And I think, I mean, we said at the start of the year, you perhaps know, that this would be the decade of socialist revolution. That was our first major article or perspective for the year on the World Socialist website. Because, even at that point, before the pandemic had really erupted, it was very clear that there was a resurgence of class struggle against austerity in one country after another, major convulsions were taking place, and on the other side, the ruling elite was resorting more and more to authoritarianism, dictatorship, and outright fascism. Represented by what's happening in the United States under Donald Trump, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte
in the Philippines, and of course Lebanon, which is that sort of sectarian post-colonial structure is also crumbling before.
Yes.
Before 09, and they're trying to make sure that no much needed revolution doesn't take place on top of that. Actually, and just before I get into the first question, because you mentioned socialist upheavals that were taking place before the coronavirus broke out in New Zealand, wasn't there already I mean, it's not called the NHS in New Zealand, but wasn't there already protests in hospitals in New Zealand on the state of affairs, on the ongoing issue of restructuring, capitalist reforms, privatization, and all of that?
Yes, and there were nationwide strikes in 2018 and 2019. Involving just about every section of the healthcare workforce, but the biggest one was nurses, who held their first strike in about 30 years, and then doctors also did so. But as in every other country, I mean, the critical, and I think this will continue. By the way, I mean, we are already seeing signs of renewed strikes by healthcare workers in particular. But the point I was going to make, in all of these struggles internationally, the problem is leadership. Basically, the problem is a lack of socialist political leadership, and which is what we are trying to build, and fighting to build in every country. I mean, in every case, there's no shortage of willingness to fight on the part of workers, and you can see that. But as you said, the crucial role is being played by the trade union bureaucracy, backed by pseudo-left organizations. Basically fake socialist outfits who are closely tied to the unions and to the Labour Party here, or the Democrats, or the Labour Party in Britain, so that's what we saw in those strikes in New Zealand as well. I mean, they were completely sold out by the nurses union. Then the teachers union, because there was a nationwide teachers strike as well, and resulted in essentially I think, a 3% wage increase in both cases, and which
Peanuts.
are, yeah, and no real increase in staffing levels, which was a major demand. I mean, perhaps a token increase that really means nothing. And as a result of that, the whole health system was totally unprepared for any outbreak of coronavirus. And that's still the case. I mean, New Zealand hasn't suffered as much as many other countries, but if there were to be a serious outbreak, the health system would be in deep trouble. Would not be able to cope with it. So the and the line at the time from the Labour government was, well, I'm sorry, we just simply don't have the money to offer anything more substantial to the health workforce and to to increase staffing, etc. Which has been completely exposed by their response to the pandemic and the massive amounts of money that are just being handed over to big business and to the banks, which is continuing.
In New Zealand, has big business very much been bailed out? And when the Labour coalition government, when they did say, okay, we're having a lockdown, everybody must stay at homes, is it very much like in Scotland, like in Belgium and other places where when there is supposedly a lockdown going on, the big businesses, they're bailed out for all of the money that they're going to be losing, but the sort of small businesses, the sort of small bars and cafes, the mom and pop shops and stuff like that, they're not the ones being bailed out. Hence why you do see so many businesses going bankrupt, as well as the fact that it's very inconsistent. Like I know in Scotland, even though because I know in Scotland, for example, under the sort of pseudo-left regime of Nicola Sturgeon's SNP, many of the big retail shops have been bailed out, but the small retail shops haven't been bailed out. And even though supposedly many bars and cafes have been told to close down, she is still saying to parents of children and to university people that you still need to go to school. And in Britain and England, it's also been a similar response. Has that also been the case in New Zealand?
Well, I mean, it's obviously not the same here as it is in those countries, New Zealand hasn't been hit by thousands and thousands of cases and mass deaths as other countries have been. Now, of course, that's all falsely attributed to the government and Jacinda Ardern's, allegedly wonderful, far-sighted leadership. But the reality is, I mean, I think we discussed this a bit last time.
Yeah.
The lockdown that was imposed here in March was basically imposed around the same time as the British lockdown, but the difference being that no one had actually died at that point in New Zealand. There was only a relatively small number of cases compared with other countries. I think we've only had fewer than 2,000 cases in New Zealand, and the lockdown was really something, the government basically caving in to the pressure from, mass pressure from the working class.
Interesting.
There were, I think we talked about the petitions that were circulated by healthcare workers online, which gained, very quickly tens of thousands of signatures. And I think the government, having gone through the nurses' dispute, which was a very bitter one, was extremely concerned about the danger of industrial action by healthcare workers, and by teachers, for that matter, who did not want to, be put at risk, of catching the virus. So for that reason, Ardern imposed the lockdown, and that did prevent the spread of the virus, certainly. Nevertheless, it was totally inadequate in a whole number of ways that we have documented. It was lifted too early. The government made a point of lifting the restrictions earlier than its own experts were telling it to. And that led to a second outbreak, basically, in August, which was not very large, but it did result in a handful of at least 2 deaths that could have been avoided. And secondly, and the other thing they failed to do was to conduct any sort of mass testing of the population, and strengthening of the healthcare system and its capacity to actually deal with cases. I mean, that has not been done really at all. And hence, as I mentioned, ambulance workers have been threatening to strike, and protesting understaffing. And similarly, nurses in general practices have been on strike over the past few months. And I think we are going to see a lot more of that in the coming year, basically.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, we're going to return to the coronavirus crisis, I think, throughout this conversation. But yes.
Sorry, I forgot to address the bailouts. I mean, the bailouts.
Oh, yeah. Go right ahead.
They've been enormous, and especially for New Zealand. You have to remember, New Zealand has 5 million people, so it's a small country. I guess that's similar to Ireland, and the Reserve Bank is printing, in this is carrying out quantitative easing, basically printing up to $100 billion, that's their target, in order to buy bonds from the banks, the private banks, and to prop up their profits. It's also just announced another $28 billion in a kind of, as cheap money or cheap loans for the commercial banks, so that they can then on-lend that money to investors and businesses and so forth. Basically unlimited money is being supplied to the banks.
I was just thinking modern monetary theory for the rich, and the kind of lemon socialism, where I think where it's it's like capitalism for the poor and socialism for the rich, right?
Right. I mean, and I didn't cover the other side of it, which is the $50 billion package, which the government has given out to corporations and businesses, and mostly in the form of wage subsidies, which is really a subsidy for the employer. It doesn't go directly to workers at all. So that has been, well, a lot of these businesses, major corporations, have just pocketed all of that money and sacked thousands of workers anyway. So the claim that was being done to protect jobs was just simply a fraud. But all of this just mirrors what's happening internationally. I mean, we've written on the site in a perspective yesterday, titled "The Coronavirus Pandemic and the Case for Expropriating the Financial Oligarchy," which goes through some of the figures on a global scale, and makes the point that the bailouts of the rich are vastly surpassing what took place in 2009 following the financial crisis. So we say, the major imperialist countries have provided a total of $10 trillion in this year in fiscal stimulus to support the banks and corporations. There's an enormous amount of money, and the results of that have been, the super rich have massively expanded their wealth. I think the stark examples are Elon Musk, who has well over $100 billion, and Jeff Bezos of Amazon, who I think has doubled his entire net worth this year, and now has over $200 billion. So that is being repeated in New Zealand on, I guess, a smaller scale. But for New Zealand, it's having a catastrophic impact on social inequality because all of this money being poured into the financial, the banking system is vastly exacerbating the housing bubble, basically, which is a major source of wealth for the rich. So you have the average house now in Auckland is $1 million, and nationwide I think it's $800,000 or maybe $700,000.
And rents are astronomically high as well in New Zealand, right?
Yeah, that's right. So if you are a student looking for, a single bedroom, you can pay more than $250 per week to get that. It's I mean, it is a serious crisis. Large numbers of people are homeless. I think homelessness hasn't actually been measured since 2013, but at that time 100 people were classified as homeless, or almost that number. So about possibly 41,000 people, and that was higher than any other OECD country, based on the available statistics, which are not great. But the point is that was 7 years ago, and things have undoubtedly got a lot worse since then. I mean, there's a lot of reporting about the conditions that people are living in, crammed into overcrowded houses and garages and tents and caravans and all of that sort of makeshift accommodation. And the government, you have to remember, the Ardern government basically campaigned, or centrally campaigned, on this issue and on alleviating child poverty.
Yeah, exactly.
In the 2017 election. Yeah. So, its entire campaign in 2017 was on social inequality, but it was all a litany of lies. I mean,
farcical.
They've done the exact opposite, which is, as I said, the biggest transfer of wealth to the rich in this country's history. So, unlike every other tendency here, every other political tendency, the Socialist Equality group that I'm part of has always said, the Labour Party, the Ardern government, is a right-wing government that rules on behalf of the rich, and that that all of its promises would be broken and were totally worthless, basically. So, I mean, Ardern, has been challenged about this recently in some of the media interviews that she's given, because the housing crisis has got so bad, and it's so glaringly obvious that nothing's been done to address poverty, and poverty is getting much worse.
But she's still finding a way to smile out of interviews by saying, "Oh, we're doing a lot. We need to do more."
Yeah.
but everything is great under us, unlike if it was the National Party.
Right. I mean, her response basically boils down to, well, give us more time. It's impossible to solve this within 3 years, and we're making progress, which is a lie. I mean, there's been no reduction in poverty. The opposite is happening. Housing prices, I think, went up 20% in a single year. This year, I mean, that's the result of her government's policies. There's no attempt to do anything about it because, as I say, I mean, she basically said in one interview recently that housing crisis is the fault of the public. The public doesn't want more affordable housing, and that's why we haven't. I'm paraphrasing, but this is more or less what she said. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, she said there hasn't been a public appetite. That's the phrase she used to bring in, tougher measures, housing more affordable, basically seeking to blame the population as a whole. But what she really means is there's no appetite in the ruling class that is making just obscene amounts of money by. I mean, you could buy a house and sell it a year later and make $100,000, $200,000, and people are doing that. There's no shortage of housing. There's as in other countries. There are tens of thousands of houses that are just empty, which are just sitting there so that they can accrue value and then be sold for profit. I mean, and that's the source of the crisis. Yeah. So
we shouldn't be too surprised about that because this is a Labour politician, and Labour is the one who got the country into this mess when it decided to. We can say it always was a bourgeoisie party, always was a very business-friendly, oligarchic party, maybe a bit of a noblesse oblige, but it was the Labour Party itself, along with the Labour Party of Australia, Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, that ushered in, I hate the term neoliberalism, but ushered in the neoliberal era, which I prefer the neo-Keynesian era, and I think that's a perfect segue then to our election autopsy. So the first, the first question I have to ask, since the last time I had you and Mr. Braddock, John, on to discuss what was the general election of New Zealand. So my first question is what was your overall impression then of the last general election of New Zealand? Were you surprised by Labour's victory? Labour got a strong majority, and I have to note that it's been the first time since New Zealand passed mixed proportional representation sometime in the 90s by popular referendum that one of the two major oligarchic parties won such a majority where they don't really need to form a government with a coalition partner. Now, so were you surprised by this victory of the Labour Party, given all that you've explained to me and to the audience? Why or why not?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, and there's a number of sort of aspects to it, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, it was widely predicted that the Labour Party would win and that it would win by a substantial margin. The reason for that is not, well, I guess, it's being widely depicted as a shift to the left, that is certainly how the pseudo-left groups have applauded, the election result. We've written about Jacobin magazine, the American publication, which said, this is a victory for the left. That's the line of the trade unions, of course, that backed the Labour Party, and the Daily Blog, the international socialist organization, and so on. I mean, we completely reject that. You know, this is not a victory for the left. It's, as I've been explaining, this is a right-wing government.
Mm-hmm.
And I think any, I mean, you know, the reason that it's got over 50%, which, as you say, is the first time Labour or National has achieved that sort of result under the current voting system since it was introduced during the 90s. You know, that I think is bound up largely with the enormous media propaganda presenting Jacinda Ardern as, you know, the savior of the nation, who sort of has defeated the coronavirus, and you know, that's part of it. There has been a huge amount of favourable media coverage, New Zealand and international. The other side of it is that the National Party is in a total state of crisis, and has been for some time. They've had you know, 3 separate leaders this year, and two of those leadership changes were within a month of each other, and you know, just a couple of months or 3 months before the election.
Yeah, and I also and also for people who don't follow New Zealand politics, even though they should, because it's as horrific to watch and yet entertaining to watch as, you know, as any American circus. But yeah, Judith Collins was the leader of the National Party up against Jacinda Ardern. So not only did we have 2 right-wingers fighting each other, but 2 female right-wingers fighting each other. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, indeed, and so the and of course Ardern has been relentlessly promoted as a woman, as a mother, you know, etc., etc. But you know, what happened in the election was the National Party was in a complete state of turmoil, and we can explain the reasons for that. But the it just was not seen as a viable alternative by many of its traditional supporters. So the Labour Party, its votes came, you know, firstly from the working class, from working class electorates, which have always or almost always voted for the Labour Party. They increased their majority substantially in those areas. But
and you
also,
blame that on the trade union leadership, the trade unionist leadership class, and the pseudo-left. They're sort of like.
So I mean, in a sense, there's just no one else to vote for, and so the Labour Party won by default. And you know, there are undoubtedly illusions among workers because of, you know, all of the anti-poverty rhetoric, which continues, you know, and despite the reality that workers are facing, they do, or many see the Labour Party as a lesser evil, or you know, a party that may be more amenable to pressure, and not as bad as the National Party. I mean, it's completely false, but those views certainly exist. However, I guess it is important to note, as we have on the site, that there's still almost 1 in 4 eligible people who didn't vote for anybody in the election, which is not widely reported, but it is the case. I think that's almost around 800,000 people, and you know, we've stressed that because it really does undermine all of this talk about, you know, a historic victory, a landslide, etc., etc. And most of those people will be young and working class. In fact, the turnout among people under the age of 25 is around 60%, and so you know, 40% of young people didn't vote, and the other thing is, while they did increase their support among working class neighbourhoods, the Labour Party also got a large amount of votes from former National Party voters who, in wealthier areas, and so some of the wealthiest suburbs in New Zealand switched from National to Labour, which I think is right. Why? Because of what I just outlined earlier, the enormous amount of money that they have received from this government. They're grateful for that, and the National Party is totally unstable and has been systematically destabilized over the past few years, which we've written about on the site. Basically because they are not seen as a reliable enough ally by US imperialism, and they are too closely tied with business interests from China, basically, which is New Zealand's largest trading partner.
Mm-hmm.
And so the media, the Labour Party supporters in the media, and all of the sort of anti-China war hawks in New Zealand have been systematically attacking the National Party as being, tools of the Chinese government for the past, several years. And they did so before the 2017 election. There were claims, explosive claims before that election that a National Party MP who was born in China was actually a spy for the Chinese Communist Party. This was never proven. It was just presented by an academic, Anne-Marie Brady, who is heavily promoted in the media here. And, they launched this McCarthyite campaign in the media, backed by the New Zealand First Party, which was which is a right-wing party that was in a coalition with Labour.
Yeah, I described them last time as basically the New Zealand answer to Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party, and basically a Kiwi version of what UKIP was when it was led under Nigel Farage, and still is cartoonishly right-wing and xenophobic.
Yeah, exactly. So the New Zealand First Party was responsible for bringing the Labour Party to power in 2017. It decided to form a coalition government with Labour. Labour had received only about 36% of the votes in 2017, and National had 40-something%. So National had the most votes, but nevertheless Labour became the government thanks to the New Zealand First Party and the Green Party, which supported it to form a coalition. So, as you say, so Labour formed a coalition with the most racist, the most militaristic, pro-law and order, etc., anti-immigrant party and anti-Chinese party in New Zealand. And meanwhile, the National Party was attacked in the media for being too close to China. The Ardern government has, then gave New Zealand First a very large role in government, making Winston Peters, the New Zealand First leader, became the foreign minister, and his deputy, Ron Mark, became the defence minister, and played a huge role in strengthening ties with Washington over the past 3 years. And calling for a greater US military presence in the Pacific region to push back against China. And they released a defense strategy in 2018, which for the first time basically took the wording from the Pentagon, saying that Russia and China were the major threats facing the international order. So none of that is intended at all as, a defense of the National Party, which is, of course, a right-wing pro-business party. But the reality is, it is no longer, for the moment anyway, it is not the favoured party of the New Zealand bourgeoisie. They have switched their support to the Labour Party very decisively, and that is largely what accounts for its landslide victory. So yeah, this is not a victory for the left or for working people, as is being claimed, basically.
And actually, before I get to the second question, because I want to talk about the Greens, and we can actually, and I'll even merge in my question about the Maori Party in that second question. But before we get to that second question, actually talk to us a bit more about the National Party being in disarray. And again, for a non-New Zealand audience, yeah, the National Party is basically what the Tories are in Britain, what the Conservative Party is in Canada, the Republican Party is in America, and what the Liberal Party is in Australia. That's basically the National Party, the traditional center-right pro-business party. So talk to us briefly about how the National Party has been in disarray, because that was very interesting what you were talking about, how you had people in the media attacking the National Party from the right. Kind of reminds me of how Donald Trump, this fluke that happened in the U.S., how even though he was the most pro-business politician the U.S. ever had, and the most explicitly, outwardly right-wing politician the U.S. ever had that became president, the deep state and much of the business community did not want Donald Trump as president, and thought that he was thought that he was an unreliable servant, mainly because of his very faux, populist rhetoric of being against the TPP and NAFTA and wanting better relations with Russia. But so talk to us about the National Party, because it seems like that's very similar to what happened in the U.S. during this Trump era.
Well, there are some similarities, I guess, because, as you say, Trump has been attacked from the right by certain. Well, the main line of the Democrats over the past 4 years has been that Trump is an agent of the Kremlin. He's the tool of Vladimir Putin. So, the implications of that position is that, which is totally absurd and has zero evidence behind it. But the implication is that Trump is not tough enough on Russia, and the Democrats would be a lot tougher, and would confront Russia in Ukraine and Syria, wherever, meaning they would pursue a far more militaristic policy. At least that has been the line of the Democratic Party. Of course, the reality is that Trump is a warmonger as well, but particularly against China. Now, the Trump administration has undoubtedly been deeply involved in New Zealand politics behind the scenes. I mean, New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes alliance, along with Australia, Canada, and Britain, the intelligence network that spies on China, spies on the Middle East, and the entire world, actually. And they're, this country is a key ally of the United States. And there was undoubtedly concern in Washington that the country was under the national government that lasted 9 years from 2008 to 2017, that the country was getting too close to China in terms of its foreign policy, and that had to be reversed. There was an intervention, which I think we spoke about last time, where the US
ambassador, right?
Yeah, the US ambassador Scott Brown, appointed by Donald Trump, intervened during the coalition talks in 2017. He gave a number of public interviews in the media, basically criticizing the National Party because the National Party had said, its leader had said, that Donald Trump was unwise to threaten a nuclear war against North Korea. And yeah, so you'll remember Trump said he would totally destroy North Korea, and this was just in the
fire and fury. Yeah,
that was shortly before the New Zealand election in 2017, and the Prime Minister at the time, Bill English from the National Party, said that this was not helpful. It was quite a mild criticism of Donald Trump, but in any case, Scott Brown, the ambassador, intervened while the coalition talks were underway to determine who would be the next government, and made very clear that Washington did not want the National Party back in there. And following his intervention, New Zealand first announced it was going with the Labour Party and forming a government. So ever since then, the attacks on the National Party, of course, have continued. There was an incident in 2018, I think, where a National Party member of Parliament went rogue and denounced the then leader Simon Bridges for corruption because he had failed to declare properly a donation from a Chinese businessman. So,
oh wow,
so this turned into a major scandal about the National Party being too close to Chinese interests, and the media was all over it. And then, that was sort of the beginning of a period of instability, which led to Simon Bridges eventually being replaced by another leader in 2020, and Todd Muller was his name. Todd Muller only lasted about a month in the leadership, and he was then replaced with Judith Collins. He resigned, saying that Todd Muller was a businessman who again wanted to strengthen relations with China. He was the subject of further, instability and leaks and so forth from within the party. And he resigned, saying, "This is far too stressful for me," basically, and I'm having a breakdown. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said. And then Judith Collins became the leader.
Who's quite a character, I have to admit.
Well, she's an extreme right winger, no doubt about that. She's the former police minister, and has called for harsher punishments and that sort of thing. The National Party's campaign, how it was totally disrupted by all of these leadership changes. I mean, they had to go around replacing all of their election advertisements with new ones because the leadership changed twice, and they had to get rid of the photos of the old leader. And so, they had a whole lot of infighting behind the scenes. They had no, unified perspective in the election, other than just proposing tax cuts, basically. And as a result, they got their second worst ever election result, which I think was 25.6%. Of the votes, and that they are a party in crisis, and as I said, Washington has a lot to do with that. The United States.
Wow, fascinating. And then before I get to this, before I get to the second question about the Greens and the Maori Party, then Judith Collins, do you think is there talks that she will still remain as leader, because it's better to have one leader to steer the ship so that our party goes in the right direction, or is she like Theresa May on the way on the way out?
Well, that's, I think I can't see her lasting in there. The general commentary is that she will not last long. But on the other hand, there's no obvious replacement for her. So at the moment, she's going to be in there for a while anyway. None of the foreign policy differences are resolved, basically. There's still significant differences, not on anything else, right? I mean, no fundamental differences on the US alliance. I should stress that. The National Party is just as committed to the military alliance with the United States.
Exactly.
They've all sent troops to Iraq and Afghanistan, Labour and National, and the only difference they have is where to line up in this growing confrontation between the United States and China. I don't think the National Party really has a clear, coherent position on that, because they're caught between the US and China, really. The United States is the most important military ally, and also, it's the US military basically guarantees that New Zealand's ruling elite, has its own neo-colonial sphere of influence in the Pacific region. So there's I mean, the only real perspective they have is that they can somehow continue to balance between China and the United States, which is totally unfeasible, because the US is demanding absolute loyalty, whether it's under Trump or under Biden, in the build-up to war against China.
Yeah, the pivot to Asia that John Pilger warned about in his documentary.
Yeah, exactly. This is a extremely dangerous situation that has been created by the United States, first by the Obama administration with its pivot to Asia, which was the military encirclement of China, as well as the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, which eventually fell through, but was designed to basically force China to play by the rules set by the United States when it came to trade and foreign investment and so on. China responded to that with its Belt and Road Initiative and attempts to basically build its own trade agreements with various countries. So that there was the development, or what we've seen is the US trying to basically develop an economic and military bloc of countries against China, and that's only going to accelerate under a Biden administration. No one should have any illusions about that, as we've stressed on the site. This is a war criminal who was part of the Obama administration. And,
war profiteer. I've called Joe Biden repeatedly a war profiteer over what happened in Ukraine, which I know we're not supposed to mention that because Ukraine is considered the good war, since it's sticking because it's sticking it to the Russians, but that coup in Ukraine, it was a coup. It was an illegal coup. It was a color revolution, and Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden were war profiteers. And if anyone should have been, impeached and disqualified, it wasn't Trump. It was Joe Biden. But yeah, and New Zealand, of course, was part of that coup, since New Zealand is a member of NATO.
Well, I mean, there would be plenty of reasons, legitimate reasons, to impeach Trump, but and to imprison Trump for a whole series of crimes. There's no doubt about that. But the position of the Democrats was as you say, that he was backing off from from what was preparation for war against Russia. I mean, that's what the coup in Ukraine was all about in 2014. They went in there, they poured billions of dollars into the anti-Russia faction of the Ukrainian ruling elite, and they overturned an elected government, and with the help of outright fascists in the right sector and the Svoboda Party, and so that became. And that's what started the civil war, where the
whose
the
heroes
Russian,
are, whose heroes were Stepan Pandera, a Nazi collaborator, and an anti-Polish, anti-Semitic, hardcore Ukrainian nationalist, Nazi collaborator.
Yeah, who the Ukrainian government is turning into a national hero now. And so, this is a bit of a diversion from New Zealand, but, New Zealand also backed that coup at the time, and has, aligned itself with the anti-Russia campaign, just as it has with the anti-China campaign. So, it's a very pro-war, pro-militarist government that we have here.
Let's put a pause on the imperialism. We're going to get back to that, and let's get to this question then. Going back to the election autopsy now. The Greens, if I'm not mistaken, will be part of the next Labour government, right?
Right. So the Greens have got about 8% of the votes in the election. The Labour government did not need them because
exactly.
They had a majority.
So in the question I want to ask then is, what can we expect of this, given the history of the Greens and other pseudo-left groups carrying water for the deeply discredited Labour Party that ushered in the era of endless austerity, as well as continuing being an imperial partner in crime to the Anglo-American Empire? What are some of the grave concerns and red flags you think left-wing people in New Zealand and outside should be concerned with this new partnership of the Greens with the Greens and Labour Party? And why do you think it is that the Labour Party, which does have this majority, they don't really need the Greens, but why do you think the Labour Party is getting in the Greens, and why do you think the Greens are committing a grave act of betrayal for the working class and for the environment movement going into this partnership with the Labour Party?
Yeah, well, the reason they've been brought in is that, as Ardern herself said, and we quoted her, they will give extra stability to Parliament and to the government, which is an interesting thing to say because, the Labour Party has more than enough votes, more than enough seats in Parliament to have a majority on anything they want to pass. But I think, they are anticipating that there is going to be a major resurgence of class struggle in opposition to the bailouts of the rich and the austerity measures that are going to come in order to repay all of that debt that the government is taking on. So what we're, there's going to be a major assault on the working class, on its standard of living, which is already well. In addition to that, there's sharply accelerating preparations for war, which this government is fully on board with. And so they need the Greens there to provide all of this with some kind of progressive coloration, basically. That's why they're being brought into the government. And they've been given a couple of ministerial roles, the Minister for Climate Change, and the Ministry, or an Associate Minister for Housing, and Minister for Domestic and Sexual Violence. And they have, so they have considerable responsibilities. And they are, I mean, the Greens are a capitalist party. So none of this is surprising, you know. I mean, as I say, they were in the last government from 2017, backing Labour and the New Zealand First Party, the far right populists or
pretty stunning
nationalists.
Pretty stunning for a supposedly left-wing party, an eco-socialist party, to even to agree to be in partnership with a wretched party like the New Zealand First Party.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it truly exposes their own nationalist and pro-military politics and anti-immigrant politics. I mean, the Greens leadership has occasionally been asked in the media, well, do you think Winston Peters, the New Zealand First Leader, is a racist? And they've actually said, well, yes, he is, but we can still work with him. I mean, I'm not kidding. That's what they say. So this it's thoroughly opportunist and crass, but they are, you know, a party of big business. Their main sort of achievement, if you like, that they trumpet from the last 3 years is their Zero Carbon Act, which is a totally meaningless piece of legislation, which just commits the government to reducing emissions, but doesn't have any kind of enforcement mechanism, and just sort of leaves it up to the market, basically, to do this. I mean, they've and you know, the climate crisis, it cannot be resolved under capitalism. I mean, it is one of the major arguments for restructuring the world along socialist lines. I mean, it also can't be resolved within a single country. I mean, it seems like an obvious point to make, but all of these green parties pretend that you can somehow do it within the present nation-state system, in which you know, major corporations call the shots on everything. It's absurd. But that's.
And do you think that the reason why the Greens lost? I mean, they lost pretty big during these elections. Do you think that goes back to the fact that because all of those pseudo-left groups, which the World Socialist website and specifically the Socialist Equality Group in New Zealand often denounce, do you think the reason why the Greens lost, didn't make any gains, is because of, number one, all the pseudo-left groups said to go for Jacinda Ardern, and then number two, because the Greens, given their track record, you know, how can you be a Green Party and support militarism overseas? How can you be a Green Party because the military is the biggest polluter in the world? These wars for oil are for fossil fuel extractions, and therefore, you know, kind of look ridiculous calling themselves, you know, a Green Party concerned about the environment, but still, you know, supporting, supporting militarism. So do you think those two reasons were the reasons why the Greens didn't make any substantial gains this last general election?
Well, they did slightly increase their votes, I believe. I was just trying to find the exact figures, but I mean, they did increase their support. I think they got 6.3% last time and 7.6% this time. I mean, they've never been a major party in that sense. But it is important to note that most of their supporters, or their core supporters, are fairly well off. I mean, they're upper middle class people. They won the, in the inner city electorates in Auckland and Wellington, is where they got a lot of their votes. And they do also have a certain appeal for young people who see it as a more left wing party, which is that, and who are concerned about climate change, I suppose. And they definitely did gain some support, and the pseudo-left groups also back the Greens. I mean, they didn't all just simply line up behind Ardern.
Okay.
So, Socialist Aotearoa, for example, called on people to vote for the Greens and said that that would basically put pressure on the Labour Party and lead to a more progressive government. All completely false, all totally contradicted by the record of the last 3 years in which the Greens were in government. And as you say, in addition to supporting these massive bailouts of the rich and money printing for the banks, they have also lined up behind multi-billion-dollar upgrades to the military. They support all of that, and they do claim to be anti-war, and have criticized the war in Afghanistan, for example, but they previously supported it. Going back 10 years or so, they were making statements in Parliament in support of New Zealand being peacekeepers in Afghanistan. There's a tremendous amount of deception in their policies, but on the latest military spending, which is very significant for New Zealand, I mean, $20 billion or so is being spent to upgrade the Navy, the Air Force, and to expand the armed forces in general. The Greens helped to justify that by producing a document, I forget what it was called, but a climate change strategy for the Defence Force, which basically claimed that all of these new Navy ships were going to be used to carry out disaster relief in the Pacific, and all of these new Air Force planes likewise will be delivering supplies or whatever to for humanitarian purposes. So
wow.
In the midst of what is the biggest military build-up internationally in a long time, and the growing threats, very belligerent threats by the United States and its allies against China.
So they do a very good job at greenwashing, and if anyone has seen Planet of the Humans, much of the so-called green solutions are all backed by big business interests, in which they're not really combating climate change, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, maybe we discussed last time this. There was a whole scandal involving the Greens shortly before the election, because they had approved, as part of this $50 billion bailout of big business, they had approved a significant grant of I think $17 million or something like that, a private school, which was $11.7 million to a private school called the Green School, which has a very small number of students. It's very elite, and all of the students pay about, or their parents pay about $20,000 or $40,000 a year. So, but it teaches, supposedly teaches ecological principles, and helps young people to, or encourages young people to become entrepreneurs in green technology and so on and so forth. So so the Greens just made sure that this school would receive a significant amount of money, while the public school system is in a state of total decay and overcrowding and understaffing and so on and so forth. And that became, when that became public, there was quite a backlash against the Green Party, including from teachers who said, well, our schools need this money, not some private school for wealthy kids from green voting families. So that's the constituency for the Green Party. It's got nothing to do with the working class. It's the affluent, upper middle class entrepreneurs, basically.
And green capitalism, that is an that is an oxymoron in and of itself. I mean, to really care about the environment, we really do need, we need socialist policies, revolutionary socialist policies, not not that kind of pseudo-left talk from the Greens. And we already talked quite a bit about before we get to Maori issues, then actually let's because we already talked a bit about foreign policy, let's actually go back to foreign policy. Let's talk about foreign policy, which got scant attention during during the debates that I saw. Climate change also wasn't really talked about all that much. So this $1 million question then is, what should the anti-war, anti-imperialist movement fear with the re-election of Ardern, the majority she acquired, and what are your thoughts to this foreign minister that she has appointed, who is of Maori descent, and what are the red flags you have regarding her? Because and the reason why I ask is because in this age of endless, cynical, superficial identity politics, I've not read one article of this woman in which her foreign policy position was revealed, let alone scrutinized.
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, the government has been praised or applauded in the media internationally because of its diversity. Of course, what they mean by diversity is
diverse of oligarch-friendly warmongers.
Yeah, right. And the same thing actually is happening in the United States with the incoming Biden administration, with Kamala Harris, this arch reactionary. They're attempting to depict as some sort of progressive, on the basis of being the first black female, and I think of Indian descent. Is that right? Or
I don't know about the Indian descent. I think her father is of Jamaican, but yeah, I think you could very well be right about that. But of course, anyone who did any elementary research into Kamala Harris knows that she was part of that tough on crime, law and order, what I call, neo-Dickensian. I mean, this is a woman who cackled about throwing poor parents into jail if their kids skipped school.
Yeah, exactly. So the same applies with the New Zealand cabinet lineup, and Nanaia Mahuta, who's the foreign minister, is not someone who was expected to be chosen for that role, and she does appear to have been chosen, in part because she is in fact from a significant Maori. Yeah, she's a part of the Maori elite essentially, And she also has various connections with Pacific leaders. And New Zealand is very much oriented towards the Pacific in strengthening its diplomatic and military and economic grip over a number of small island countries, Tonga and Samoa and various other places. And so I think there are calculations involved in selecting her for that role. But I guess the government has sort of has very clearly revealed its foreign policy or its pro-war orientation just after the election. One of the first actions of the government, just a couple of days after the election, was to announce that they are redeploying the New Zealand Air Force into Okinawa, where they have been stationed as part of the enforcement of sanctions against North Korea. Wow. And at the same time, or shortly after that, there was a raid by police in New Zealand on a charity called the New Zealand North Korea Friendship Society, which is just a small, group that had sent a very small amount of money to North Korea, to the Red Cross, I believe, in order to buy medical supplies. And this was ludicrously, they were accused by the police of violating United Nations sanctions against, which are aimed at, stopping North Korea, or ostensibly aimed at stopping the development of nuclear weapons. So wow. This was a very clear signal to the United States, primarily, that New Zealand was fully aligned with war preparations. And of course, it's not just against North Korea; it's fundamentally aimed against China.
Part of that pivot to Asia policy,
right? And I should also mention the new defense minister, Penny Henare, who's also Maori, and is in charge of all of this. And his father, or perhaps his grandfather, was a leading figure in the military in World War II, leading the Maori battalion, which has been glorified here by successive governments for leading young Maori into war to fight on behalf of imperialism, and that's the agenda of this government is to recruit those young people today into the military. So there's real calculations bound up in that appointment as well. I mean, the other thing is that, or the other signal that was sent to the United States was Ardern held a conversation with Joe Biden just a few days ago, or perhaps a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, where she invited him to visit New Zealand next year. And he's also, I think, been in Australia to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the ANZUS Treaty being signed in 1951, which was essentially a Cold War military security alliance between Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. So that's a very significant, invitation to Joe Biden to, signal that once again New Zealand is on board with the build-up to war in the Pacific region against China.
Wow. And so definitely the anti-war movement, the anti-imperialist movement is going to have a lot of work cut out for them, and they should not be blinded by the cynical, superficial identity politics of, oh wow, we have a Maori person as foreign minister here, we have a defense minister, because they're not going to be champion the causes of indigenous people globally and the oppressed working class, regardless of skin color. No, they're going to be continuing on with New Zealand's empire.
Yes, and can I say something else about this? I mean, if you're following the World Socialist website, you'll have seen that Australian imperialism is in a major crisis at the moment because of the revelation of or the partial revelation.
Of the systemic war crimes that have taken place in Afghanistan. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. This has been building up for some time, and the military has basically been forced to release a report or to commission a report which has identified 39 murders of Afghan civilians or unarmed people, prisoners, including children, by Australian special forces in Afghanistan over several years. And there are it's obvious that this is only the tip of the iceberg, and there are other killings that are referred to in this report which they claim they just don't have enough evidence for it. But it's being presented. I mean, this is an attempt at basically at damage control by the Australian military. They are absurdly saying that this was a few rogue people within the special forces.
Yeah.
I think they've said that 19 soldiers are going to be charged, and no one has been charged yet, by the way. And it's far from certain if that's actually going to happen. But all of this is, extremely discrediting for Australia and for the war in Afghanistan, which of course is a bloody, brutal imperialist war. But these crimes have largely been obscured from the public over the past, almost 20 years since that war began. I mean, now people are getting just a glimpse of how extremely brutal it has been for, it's been a war of suppression of the Afghan population, which, naturally enough, is overwhelmingly hostile to the invading US-led forces. Anyway, all of this triggered a response from China, who have denounced Australian war crimes in Afghanistan. And there was a tweet posted by a mid-level official in the Chinese Foreign Ministry depicting a Australian soldier murdering a child in Afghanistan, which is not an actual photograph. It's a kind of photoshopped tweet. And this has just sparked denunciations from Prime Minister Scott Morrison in Australia, as well as the opposition and the entire media establishment against China for pointing out accurately the war crimes carried out by Australian troops. This is being turned into a campaign against China. And New Zealand is getting involved in this. They have not, Ardern has said nothing about the Australian war crimes. She has not denounced it at all. When she was asked about it, she said it's not our position to say anything about it, basically. And so the reason for that is that obviously New Zealand's SAS has been in Afghanistan doing much the same thing. It just hasn't been exposed to the same extent. And there was an inquiry into New Zealand's war crimes in Afghanistan which wrapped up last year, and it concluded that yes, New Zealand special forces had been involved in a raid on an Afghan village, and at least one child was killed, and other civilians were wounded or killed. But it was all above board. It was all legal. This is the position of the New Zealand government. No one's going to be charged, and that's it. And so they are keeping a very tight lid on what New Zealand has actually done in Afghanistan. And now, while they are not criticizing or denouncing these horrific crimes carried out by Australian forces, they have denounced the Chinese government for drawing attention to these crimes. So Ardern has said that the tweet I referred to is not factual. That's completely false. It is factual. It's a representation of what Australian soldiers did in Afghanistan, which included the murder of children. This the point, and Nanaia Mahuta, the foreign minister, has also joined in denouncing China for posting this supposedly inflammatory tweet. So I should also add that the Daily Blog, which are major supporters of the government and are funded by a number of trade unions, has joined in, using this. It's almost absurd.
So all of the outrage is just on this one Chinese minister, calling out the war crimes of Western powers, since China's always getting this finger wagging about Uyghurs, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Tibet, and instead of just even ignoring this minister and using their time on social media to denounce systemic war crimes, no, it's attack the truth. It's attack the truth.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's totally obscene, really, and quite astonishing that somehow Australian war crimes, atrocities committed against defenseless people in Afghanistan, that this has been turned into a campaign by Australia and New Zealand, and also France, I believe, and the United States have all got involved, denouncing this tweet, denouncing the Chinese government for drawing attention to these crimes, and for calling on Australia to hold people to account. And the aim of all of that, the aim of all of this, is to create a sort of atmosphere of nationalism, of support for the military, and the idea that you cannot criticize our troops. How dare China criticize them? And to, of course, to fan the flames against China and to just divert attention from these crimes in Afghanistan. And as you say, the claim is put forward that China's being hypocritical because look at their treatment of the Uyghurs. There are 1 million supposedly in detention camps, which these allegations are pretty murky.
Flimsy of itself, and actually in the future we definitely should do a program and try to invite Danny Haifeng of Black Agenda Report to talk about the weaponization of half-truths as well as full-blown fake propaganda when it comes to China. Yeah.
Well, the point is, and we have denounced the Chinese government on the WSWS because they have undoubtedly violated the rights of the Uyghur population in numerous ways, and there are human rights abuses going on. There's no doubt about that. However, to claim, as the Western media does, as the United States and its allies are doing, that this is somehow worse than than their crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan is totally ludicrous. I mean, entire societies have been destroyed. Cities have been turned into rubble. Millions of people, or well over 1 million people, have been slaughtered, and millions more have been turned into refugees and been wounded and so on. There is zero equivalence between those atrocious war crimes and China's actions against the Uyghurs. So I mean, as I was saying, the entire media, or virtually in New Zealand, is lining up behind this renewed anti-China campaign, and in support of Australian imperialism in Afghanistan.
And actually,
including, as I mentioned, including the Daily Blog, which parades itself as sort of a left-wing or liberal publication.
But they're just a bunch of left nationalists.
They're just a bunch of nationalists. I mean, there's nothing left-wing about it. I mean, really, and it reflects the positions of the trade unions who support this blog, and of course the Labour Party itself.
And before we talk about, because you mentioned again New Zealand co-opting Maori culture and Maori nationalism, it's narrow nationalism and its imperialism. But before we get into that, just on the issue of foreign policy, this foreign minister of New Zealand, because talking about systemic war crimes in Afghanistan at the hands of New Zealand and Australia. This shouldn't come as any surprise. Because just on the issue of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, didn't WikiLeaks already reveal systemic war crimes, not just of Britain and the U.S. when it comes to Afghanistan and Iraq, but also its coalition partners like Australia and New Zealand, and I assume that that the incoming Ardern administration and her foreign minister hasn't said anything about Julian Assange being arbitrarily detained in Belmarsh prison, and no calls for Julian Assange to be set free.
They haven't said anything about it. Well, that's not quite true. I mean, there was a petition presented to Parliament, I think a couple of years ago, by supporters of WikiLeaks in New Zealand, who were calling on Ardern were calling on Parliament to discuss offering asylum to Julian Assange in New Zealand. The response of the government was that they were not going to discuss this. Basically, they completely line up with the campaign against WikiLeaks, and that has that's always been the case. The Green Party says nothing about it. They are fully supportive of this incarceration of Julian Assange for the supposed crime of revealing US war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, in which, as you say, New Zealand is totally implicated. One thing that WikiLeaks did reveal about New Zealand, because in the embassy cables, the US embassy cables that were leaked, included a few thousand from New Zealand's, the US embassy here. And in one of those cables, it summarized a discussion that was held in the New Zealand government, which was a Labour government in 2003, when they were under considerable pressure to join the war in Iraq. and there was massive opposition to that. There were huge protests internationally, including in New Zealand, against the war. And the cable, which was published in 2010, which I'm just trying to find, but it said, essentially the New Zealand government was pressured by the United States to send troops to Iraq, or else, Fonterra, which is New Zealand's largest corporation, which produces dairy products for a lot of the world, Fonterra had a relationship with the Oil for Food program that exported to Iraq under the United Nations, during the sanctions
those
imposed.
Deadly sanctions,
yes. So the US said, look, if Fonterra wants to keep its lucrative deal to send milk products to Iraq, then New Zealand has to support our invasion and occupation. And at that point, the New Zealand government decided to send a handful of troops to Iraq. So, in other words, WikiLeaks exposed the fact that this was a totally mercenary, profit-driven intervention by New Zealand in support of the US illegal war and destruction of Iraq. And as I say, that was under a Labour government that did that, and I think that these people hate WikiLeaks. They are completely hostile to freedom of the press and freedom of speech, and are totally complicit in seeking to suppress it. Yeah.
Wow, and hey, to all of you people who foolishly think that that all of those big left-wing groups, supposedly left-wing groups, are on the side of of peace, hey, you better hold that foreign minister and this incoming government into account. And that leads to my second to last question, which is, you mentioned, these two Maori figureheads to the right wing Jacinda Ardern government of Labour, and that leads to this question, which is the Maori Party. Now, the Maori Party, if I'm not mistaken, did not do too well during this election. I think they were also I think their vote also almost collapsed. Why do you think that is? Is that similar to why the Greens? Do you think that's similar to the Greens and again the pseudo-left's support for another coalition government?
Well, I think we discussed a bit about the Maori Party last time.
Oh, yeah. It was very enlightening. Very enlightening. Do you think that that Maori people just don't trust the Maori Party given their partnership with the National Party, and given the fact that
that's right.
that they're not, like, yes, they are a nationalist party. They are a Maori nationalist party, but they don't even. But it's not. But I mean, well, yeah, they're part of a Maori misleadership class. They're part of a Maori capitalist class, though. Yeah,
precisely. I mean, it's they got about 1.2% of the votes in the election. So they actually, however, they did win an electorate, and that means they now have 2 seats in Parliament, which is an improvement because last time they had 0 seats. Now,
Interesting.
they've, I mean, 1.2% is nothing. It's well, it's not nothing. It's 33,000 votes. But if you consider the Maori population is probably around 15%, the vast majority of Maori do not support the Maori Party, and the reason for that, as we discussed last time, is their history, which is thoroughly right wing. They were in the previous government, the National Party government, which was in power from 2008 to 2017. And during that time, they supported a whole range of different reactionary policies, including an increase in the consumption tax that put up the cost of living for working people, the mass redundancies that in the public sector that followed the global financial crisis, and partial privatization of power companies and those sorts of policies. All
of this disastrous for the working class, especially the Maori, who are minorities in their own country. Yeah,
exactly. So this that's right. So the legacy of all of that was extremely destructive for the working class, and especially Maori. But the Maori elite, the tribal leadership, who are in charge of significant capitalist ventures, including fisheries companies, tourism companies, and property, a large amount of property. They were, they profited substantially over that whole period. The wealth of the Maori elites increased, quite significantly. I don't have the exact figures, but it was, in line with the ruling elite as a whole. And part of the reason for that was the Treaty of Waitangi Settlements, which we also touched on last time, or explained last time. I mean, the national government simply, to cut a long story short, signed a large number of deals with different tribes to give them, large amounts of money, multi-million-dollar settlements that were handed over, and this is supposedly to redress the crimes carried out by British imperialism in New Zealand, including confiscating Maori land. In reality, all of this money is used to, start capitalist ventures and make a few people very rich, and cultivate a sort of upper middle class layer of Maori, and to tell the working class that that these people are, in the leadership of the tribes and so forth, somehow represent all Maori, which is completely false, and aimed at, dividing up the working class. I mean, as socialists, our aim is to unite workers across all races and ethnicities and nationalities and so on. New Zealand is a very diverse country. It's not just white people and Maori. There are very significant number of Chinese immigrants, Indian immigrants, and of course Pacific Islanders. The policies of the Maori Party include a total ban on immigration, which they campaigned on in the last election. It was the harshest.
So this last election, 2020, they actually were campaigning on that.
Yeah, and they put forward the notion that immigrants were coming here and they were taking houses, they were using up supplies that should be allocated to Maori. I mean, it's this kind of frankly, it was a racist policy that they were putting forward, and their whole position on any issue is to frame it in terms of race. So, for example, in the healthcare system, there's a crisis undoubtedly affecting the Maori working class particularly, but the working class as a whole, who just can't access decent healthcare. There's a rise of third world diseases, skin conditions, and respiratory conditions, largely caused by poor housing. And the response of the Maori Party is, well, we need a separate healthcare system, or we need a specific amount of funding to be diverted from the public health system into services specifically for Maori. So we need a racially segregated system. And they argue the same thing in terms of public housing and the prison system. It's extremely reactionary. I mean, yeah. It is.
I mean, on the one hand, I can sort of understand. On the one hand, I can sort of understand where they're coming from, but on the other hand, like you said, it's just propping up more racial segregation, more racial tension, and given the track record of the Maori Party, it's just propping up a Maori misleadership class in which a very tiny elite of Maori people are benefiting from the riches of capitalism. And what I liked about our conversation was people who use New Zealand as the model for land rights and for reconciliation between the dispossessed indigenous people of North America and Australia and the Sami people. People often use New Zealand as that model, but what you explained to me was that no, do not use the New Zealand model as that model for land rights, right, because it's just propping up Maori capitalism. It's not a real anti-colonial document, and the way forward for racial harmony and for a better socialist society.
Yeah, well, the way forward is the unity of Maori and non-Maori workers, and the Maori Party very explicitly opposes that. I mean, in particularly with their anti-immigrant policy, but with all of their policies that are, I guess, aimed at fundamentally declaring that Maori must run their own quote unquote affairs, and it's not. See, none of these proposals will do anything to benefit the Maori working class. What's required, obviously, is a huge infusion of funding into all services, which entails, which can only be done by confiscating that money from the big businesses and the banks. There is no other way to resolve the social crisis. I mean, what they're basically suggesting is that Maori should be fighting non-Maori for the division of the scraps that are thrown to the poor, and of course, in the process, the elite at the top will run all of these services and continue making large amounts of money. So yeah, it's identity politics basically, and it's something we staunchly oppose.
And then just in closing, before I get to before I get to the last question, is on this issue of Maori identity being very cynically used for, not just for reactionary Maori nationalism, but also reactionary nationalism. Well, nationalism is reactionary, period. But because New Zealand culture loves to use this idea that we get along with our indigenous people, and they always are using the haka and the warrior dances to whitewash the imperial crimes of New Zealand and to promote more imperialism. So the question I have is, are we going to continue to see more of that? And do you think, given the Maori Party's track record, because I'm sure the Maori Party also likes to engage in this, that's why a lot of Maori people did not vote in droves for the Maori Party to look after their well-being?
Yes. Basically, I mean I referred to this statement by Nanaia Mahuta, the foreign minister, responding to the Chinese tweet. What she said was, New Zealand doesn't support disinformation that has the potential to be inflammatory. So, I mean, again, just completely lining up with the Australian government and the media in lashing out over this image posted, depicting Australian war crimes in Afghanistan, which is not disinformation; it's accurate information. But yes, I mean the reason, part of the reason for the promotion of people such as her is undoubtedly to give a friendly face to what is an extremely brutal government and an imperialist government, and the Maori Party is equally complicit in all of that. As I say, they all glorify the Maori battalion and Maori involvement in World War I and World War II. They've invested a lot in that, and every party in Parliament, in fact, this is what are they saying? That basically that Maori youth should be cannon fodder for New Zealand imperialism. In World War II, that's what happened. I mean, they had a casualty rate that was well above the New Zealand army as a whole. Maori were, more susceptible to disease from European people, and they were, they had a much higher rate of deaths, and it was always seen as important since the founding of the New Zealand colony, just about,
to cynically use Maori culture and the plights of Maori people, that, if you want fair treatment in New Zealand, go fight in these colonial wars, when really, I mean, and maybe you can speak to this, because I'm sure your interaction with Maori people, those who are curious in the socialist equality group and those who are also involved in frontline anti-war policies, I'm sure the impression should be that we're a colonized people. We should not be supporting the colonization of other people overseas, and yet New Zealand has this Maori misleadership class and these Maori figureheads all cynically using their culture to prop up New Zealand nationalism and using Maori nationalism, which should be to denounce white supremacy and the global imperial system, and yet it's being used to go fight off in Vietnam, go fight off in Iraq, and go fight off in Afghanistan, each war an imperial war. Right.
Yeah, you that's right. It's there's among the Maori working class. I mean, they face the same issues as the working class as a whole. There's no, there's no great divide, and indeed, there's lots of intermarriage between Maori and white New Zealanders and immigrants. It's a very it's not it's not a segregated population in that sense, and so I think there's no these sorts of policies don't really resonate with the vast majority of Maori workers. They are being assiduously promoted by the ruling class, which does see the value in trying to basically make every class issue a racial issue, to divert attention from the real source of poverty and inequality in society, which is capitalism, and to blame it on white racism, white supremacy, etc., etc. That can be resolved. I mean,
Chinese immigration, Asian immigration.
Yes, yeah, that too, and I mean, I should mention that the new police minister is also Maori, Poto Williams.
Wow. So this upcoming Labour administration is really trying to use Maori culture to its full advantage to co-opt.
Well, as in response to the protests over the killing of George Floyd, which there were those protests in New Zealand and many other countries as well against police brutality and police killings. The Ardern basically said, well, what we're doing to address this issue is to put more Maori into leading positions in the police force, and that's what they've done at the highest level. It's
not ending the privatized military, not ending the privatized law enforcement and the prison industrial complex, not doing anything to stop the racist classist drug war. It's just, oh no, we just need more Maori misleaders.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And to put forward that as a solution, which it obviously isn't. I mean, there clearly is racism all throughout the police force. That's obvious. But the source of that is fundamentally the capitalist system, and the tremendous the impoverishment of large numbers of people of all ethnicities, and it certainly won't be resolved by appointing a few Maori to senior positions in the police force. Yeah, I mean,
so she hasn't talked about defunding the police. Actually, has there even been calls for amongst the pseudo-left in New Zealand on defunding the police or reallocating how money is spent on the police force? Or
well, there have been some of those calls, yes, and there has been a campaign against the arming of the police. However, at the same time, this government is vastly expanding the police. I mean, they've recruited thousands more police officers, and they do have access to weapons like they haven't before. It's there's a real hypocrisy, I guess, in criticizing police brutality and turning around and supporting this government.
Exactly.
That's what I'd say to that.
All righty. Well, then my last question, because I think we already covered a lot on why just sends what, and It's because of a compliant corporate state media. It is because of it is because of these pseudo-left groups and a Maori misleadership class, and all of us, and an establishment totally in disarray, and using China to divide and conquer even its own oligarchy. So then I think my last question then yeah, because I don't want to sort of repeat my questions and saying, how is it that the Labour government gets away with that? Because I think you did a very good job answering all of that. But I think my last question then is, given this very bleak situation that we're that we're in, and I've been quite upset with international coverage when it comes to New Zealand. I mentioned when I mentioned in my questions and in my notes that even that even peace organizations I like, even people I know who are very anti-imperialist. I won't name any names, but they've also been recycling propaganda that Jacinda Ardern is the good apple, in a sea of grotesque figures like Trump, now Biden, Boris Johnson, Scott Morrison of Australia, Justin Trudeau of Canada. But yeah, they're obviously just reading really bad information coming from the likes of Jacobin. But putting aside that, because we already answered, why that is, why so many left-leaning people outside of New Zealand have been misled and deceived, with Jacinda Ardern being painted as this progressive, which she's not. She's not even a socialist. So then the last question then is this: where does the left go from here then? Given the fact that New Zealand, it seems the situation in New Zealand with the pseudo-left is almost even worse than the situation in Canada, the United States, and Britain. Australia as a whole, that's a whole other can of worms. Its issues with the pseudo-left. But it seems in New Zealand it's even worse because there's not much of of an independent left-leaning media. There's not much of an independent left force that puts the unions into account. So where does the left go from here, given the fact that the propaganda around Jacinda Ardern is so intense, and that the Socialist Equality Group doesn't have it's not a political party yet. But I know, reading your coverage, you, John Braddock, and your colleagues said that, yeah, sorry guys, but there's nobody to vote for in this last election. There is no Green Party that you can vote for. There is no, there is no opposition force that you can vote for, given, the state of affairs. So where does the left go? Go from here, given it has a lot of work cut out from them.
I guess our orientation and the orientation of the International Committee of the Fourth International that we're part of, that publishes the World Socialist website, is not to, I guess, it's not to the left in that sense. I don't think we would put it that way. Our orientation is towards the working class, and towards the international unification of the working class on a common political platform that actually represents its interests in overthrowing capitalism. And the major division, if you like, between us and the pseudo-left is on that question. the need for the working class to have its own independent political leadership grounded in internationalism and socialism and totally hostile to and opposed to every capitalist party. That's the same in New Zealand as it is in the United States or anywhere else, where in one way or another the pseudo-left, to define the pseudo-left is important. I mean, we're talking about groups which falsely claim some association with socialism, but in practice serve to divert social opposition in the working class back behind the capitalist established parties in various ways, and also to suppress workers' independent opposition by subordinating them to the trade unions and supporting the trade union bureaucracy and its domination over the working class. I guess to your question, not sure your question.
Yeah, in terms of what does the left do going forward, given that so many got co-opted by the Labour Party, there's a misleadership part on the part of the Greens. The Party, many aren't under any illusion that they're a true left-wing anti-colonial party. Where does the left go from here, given given the state of affairs?
Well, workers who are disgusted with capitalism, who are seeking an alternative, have to understand that the system cannot be reformed. There is no possibility of that through any of the parliamentary parties or the parliamentary system itself. We're talking about the police and police brutality. The police can't be reformed. They are an instrument of class rule. They're being strengthened in every country and militarized in every country. And it's not because of white supremacy. It's because of the crisis of capitalism and the growth of opposition within the working class who are being plunged into poverty. That's why the state is being militarized. It's to prepare for what are going to be explosive revolutionary struggles, and workers who are seeking a genuine alternative have to approach politics from that standpoint. That the only that you have to prepare for a revolution, and that means building the necessary leadership for that. History shows in the Russian Revolution, for instance, a small revolutionary party, if it has a political program that matches the objective interests of the working class, such as the Bolshevik Party had, can grow very quickly and can come to lead, revolutions under those conditions. And I think so. There's no shortcut to that. And in a sense, pseudo-left politics encourages people encourages the delusion that there's some sort of shortcut, some sort of temporary fix that can be done. In the United States, the claim is that Joe Biden is going to be pressured to the left. I mean, that's what they are saying in Jacobin magazine, or that he can be susceptible to pressure. I mean, it's just blatantly false. I mean, it's completely false.
Exactly.
But the exact same argument is recycled here in support of the Ardern government, despite 3 years of worsening social inequality, and it's so that's what we say to workers. That you've got to adopt a revolutionary standpoint. And an internationalist one. You cannot be just oriented towards changing conditions within New Zealand as the kind of starting point and the end point for your politics. That would be fatal. We live in an era of, global interconnectedness, unlike anything before seen, and New Zealand's politics are determined by global processes, by global events. That's certainly true of the Ardern government. It's doing nothing different fundamentally from any other government. Yes, it's escaped so far. We've escaped the worst of the pandemic, but the bailouts of the rich and the attacks on the working class, the mass redundancies, and impoverishment of vast numbers of people. These are all international processes, and workers have got to approach politics in that way, as taking the international situation as their starting point. And not whatever the conditions happen to be in this or that country. Otherwise you'll just not be able to understand any political development, let alone oppose it.
Yeah, and then the final comments I'll make is that the people power movements need to be vigilant. They need to be vigilant, and they just need to be under no illusion. Lots of people are deceived because of trade unions. Lots of people are deceived because of these, as you mentioned, the pseudo-left outlets, and we can't be under any illusion that just because a Labour Party, says some vague things that they're going to, reduce child poverty, invest more in anti-racist legislations. We need to be vigilant that no, these are rival oligarchic parties, and we need to treat them as such, as the enemy of the working class and of all of humanity. So hopefully, hopefully people wake up to that if they haven't already, and just remain vigilant against that. And alrighty, until then, this was a very lengthy discussion. Apologies to any of our viewers, but no, I think this was a good one. But yeah, we had to talk about the coronavirus crisis, because it is Anywho, but until then. Mr. Pierce, thank you so much for joining us. We are joined on 1+1 by Thomas Peters of the Socialist Equality Group in New Zealand, and a contributor to the World Socialist website. I look forward to having you back on in the future to talk more things New Zealand. Let me know if there's any stories you guys are covering that you would like 1+1 to give you guys a platform, and also give my best to our good comrade John Braddock. I'm sorry that he's under the weather, but I hope he gets well soon.
Thanks, Youri, and it's been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to have you on, and looking forward to having you back on, and best of luck to the Socialist Equality Group as you guys try to become very much an adversarial force in New Zealand politics, because boy, New Zealand needs it. The world needs it.
Yes.
Anywho,
absolutely.
Power to the people.
Great to talk to you. Thanks.
Ciao until then.